My name is Katherine Doyle Nutter. My parents chose that name because I had an aunt that was named Frances, and Katherine was named after another aunt. I was born on January the 4th, 1924, on a farm near Esmond, Kansas. My dad was a farmer, owned 240 acres. The house was very, very small, and I do mean small. It was like 3-4 rooms for 9 people. It had no bathrooms. We didn't even know there was such a thing at that time. It was only an outside toilet, 2-holder, used Montgomery Ward catalogs for toilet paper. And in the wintertime, we had what, as kids called, the thunder mug. And then it was always my job to empty the darn thing. And 9 people in 4 rooms. Actually 3 rooms, because the other was just kind of a lean-to that was enclosed. But 2 bedrooms, 1 kitchen, 1 living room. And we had beds out in the living room too. You slept maybe crosswise in the bed so 4 people could sleep in the bed. Our earliest childhood memory, I can remember when my brother Gene was born, and I would have been about 3 and a half. I can also remember when I was 3 of putting a marble up my nose, and I was so panicky. And I ran out in the yard, and my father just took his hand and pushed it down, and thought he was such a hero. You imagine sticking a marble up your nose. Family chores, we all had our family chores to do. When we got home from school or during the summertime, summer vacation. Summer vacation, it was pulling weeds, picking potato bugs off the potato vines, sticking it in kerosene cans so it'd kill the bugs, herding cattle along the roadways for them to eat the grass down. Always taking care of kids. Always. In the winter time, we had wood to chop. We had cobs to get in. We had to gather the eggs, slop the hogs, feed the horses, milk the cows. And my least favorite was gathering eggs, because there's always one cranky old hen that would pick your hands every time you stuck it. She'd be laying her eggs and you'd stuck your hand underneath her. Yeah, the oatmeal pan. I hated to do dishes. And I took the oatmeal pan and I took it out by the garage and I dug a little hole and I buried it. Well, they just never found that pan. They never knew what happened to it. And I never did tell them. I also buried another thing, and that was my dad's razor strap. And that was really a bad one. I had to go get that. I think he had a suspicion of what happened. Or that I was... See, he always used a razor strap on us if he gave us a spanking. And that thing stung. I mean, it was about that wide, and he'd hit us on the butt with it. You only one stripe of that thing, that you straightened up. I can't remember. Probably sassed him, because he wouldn't stand for any sass. Well, I hid it, and then it was just out. I hid it out the chicken lot, and a couple of days he was wanting to sharpen his razor, and he couldn't find it, so I thought I'd better go get it. I brought it back. I didn't tell him I carried it off. I just told him I found it. When I was a kid, we played hopscotch, Andy Over, Fox and Goose. It was a game that was played in the wintertime where you made a round circle and one was a fox and the rest was geese. And Oh my gosh, I can't even think of all the games we used to play. I can remember of us having Tinker toys, but I think my Aunt Anne provided those Tinker toys. And then we always had jigsaw puzzles. But those came from a friend of my mother's that lived in Nisbin, Kansas, that when her kids got tired of them, she would bring funny papers up from their Sunday paper, because we didn't have a Sunday paper and we didn't have funny papers. She would also bring these puzzles for us. We always had a deck of cards, though, for some reason or other. We played a lot of cards. We didn't really celebrate birthdays. We each knew when our birthdays were, of course, and as far as having cake and ice cream or parties, we didn't. There's too many of us. I can't even recall that anybody sang happy birthday. There might not have even been a song then, back 89 years ago, of happy birthday. Other holidays like Christmas, I can only remember one time when I was probably about 8 years old that my dad went to town and came home with a big blackboard with some chalk, but that was for all of us kids. If the weather was good, we would bundle up with a big old, what we called the buffalo robe, and it was a buffalo hide. Cover up with that and go to midnight mass, if the weather permitted. But as a rule, we were snowed in and never even got to mass. Mom would always make a cake for Christmas. But Bernard and I always had what we called our Christmas tree. And my Uncle Joe, Doyle, he had a lot of evergreens. So Bernard and I would sneak up there and we would take our little coping saw and saw off some of the branches and bring them home. And then we would make, with our colored crayons, we would make on our tablets that we used for school. We would color each little stripe and then we'd cut them out and then we'd paste them together with flour and water. That was our glue. And then we would decorate our Christmas tree branches with that chain of colored, and that was our decorations. So we made it festive. And I can remember one time my Uncle Joe, now I'm saying Uncle Joe because Uncle Joe was the one that had money. He inherited, or his wife did. If there was a party, they had it, and we were invited. It was Christmas Eve, and our school always had a Santa Claus costume. And Santa Claus came in, and I recognized my dad's voice. And that's when I got my white comb for Christmas, And the mailman, bless his heart, but he would always come by the last day of school before Christmas vacation and bring each one of us a box of Cracker Jacks. And that was the biggest, well, at that time, Cracker Jacks also had a little prize inside. It wasn't very much, but to us it meant a lot. And of course, the Cracker Jacks did too. Well, actually, my favorite toy was my doll that I bought myself when I was about 10 years old. I washed blackboards at country school and hauled in the wood and coal for the stoves and cleaned the ashes out of the stove for money to buy my doll. I sold cloverine salve because I saw this ukulele that was advertised in the Kansas City Star, and I just couldn't live without it. So I also saw in the Kansas City Star where you could really make a lot of money selling cloverine salve. So I sent off for this kit of cloverine salve, and wintertime, snow drifts, piled high. That was in 36 when we had all those bad storms and plowed through the countryside by foot and selling cloverine salve till I got enough money to buy this ukulele. The little tiny thing about 12 inches, 15 inches long. And all it had wasn't even catgut. So after all my brothers and sisters got through playing too, the strings didn't last very long. I started school at a country school, but I think it was called Logan. Started out in first grade. We didn't have any kindergarten then. I went there until I was in the 8th grade. For 8th grade, when you completed the 8th grade, you had a graduation, just like they had in high school. You had to take a county test of every subject that you studied. If you got on the honor roll, you got to set up on the stage. You had to have a grade of at least 90. And when I got my report card back, I had 89 and 10 11ths. And I was sick. I even wrote into the superintendent of the county asking if I couldn't sit on the stage. He wrote back a real nice letter to me and said that if he did it for me, he'd have to do it for a lot of other kids too. But it broke my heart. It was from the first grade to the 8th grade, and there was probably, I would say probably maybe 20 kids, all in one room. The teacher taught every grade, and of course you learned a lot from being with other kids. You know, if you was in first grade, you could learn because you could listen to what she was teaching the second graders, and then when you got, well, you could listen to all of them. We had an outside toilets, of course, and we had a well that we had to get water from, and during the day the water would freeze in the bucket, and you'd have to, and we all drank out of the same dipper. So if somebody got something, we all got it. I stole an apple one time when the rest of the kids were out at recess, except one other girl, and she was studying, and this nice big red apple was in the inkwell. I looked at it, and we were only going to go a half a day to school for some reason or other. But some of the kids brought a treat, you know, or a lunch. But Mom didn't send any with us because 7 kids. I thought, oh, I'm just going to take one little bite and I'm going to turn it around so nobody sees it. And then I took another bite until I had it half gone on one side. So then I took the apple and turned it so that the gal that sat there, that was her apple, she wouldn't know that until I don't know why I ever thought that nobody had ever known that half of that apple was gone. How dumb can you be? When she got to her seat, she noticed it right away, and she held up her hand and she says, "Somebody's eaten half of my apple, but there's only 2 of us there." And this gal said, "She did it." I was so embarrassed. And I got a licking when I got home too. I was probably 8 years old. Oh, I've got another incident I've got to tell you about in school. We all wore our hair short. We called it a bob. And this one girl, her name was Mary Lou Beardsley, and she had her hair cut just exactly like mine. We all had a haircut just exactly. Well, Dad had cut my hair the day before. He always cut our hair. And she says, "You look like an old cow with your hair cut that way," and wrote me a note. And I tore it up and wrote back and said, "You look like an old bull with your hair cut that way." And she took it up to the teacher, and the teacher made me write on the blackboard 100 times, "I like Mary Lou Beardsley. I like Mary Lou Beardsley." I still don't like Mary Lou Beardsley.
Well, when we were in grade school, we had boys, too, that were in 8th grade, 7th and 8th grade, that they were big boys. I mean, the reason that they were so much older is that they had to stay out of school sometimes in the fall of the year to help their parents with harvest. These boys would hunt on the way to school and when they went home. And this one time I had these shoes on that my aunt gave me they had probably 1.5 inch heels, which they were very out of style, but I had to wear them because that's all we had. And I was walking ahead of them, and they were shooting, or one of them was shooting at my heels, and the dust was just a-flying all around me, like a rifle. Yeah, they would shoot squirrels and possums and skunks and stuff on the way. And at that time, hides were really in great demand. I mean, they used my heels as a target. But I know they didn't intend to shoot me, but they came close. That's scary. You just feel like pulling in your hind end, and of course those old dust roads, and you just see the dust flying. These bullets were hitting the road, and I'm sure that they were not aiming at me. They were just trying to scare me. It was everybody was allowed to bring guns, all the boys, because they hunted on the way home. And in the summertime, my grandmother was a widow, and she would always stay at our place all summer. Grandma Kelleher, she had this long gray hair with a little bun on top of her head. In the summertime, of course, we had this very, very small house. We would move our beds out in the yard and cover them with mosquito netting. That's where we'd sleep for the summer, my grandmother and I, and we'd take turns sleeping with my grandmother because we fought over who would sleep with her. But we always had to kneel down on our bare knees on the old ground, said our prayers before we crawled underneath the netting. But then we'd look at the stars, and she would tell us the different constellations. Well, this one summer, I was 12 years old, I can remember that, and my aunt wanted me to come out and stay with them. Aunt Jo, my favorite, she had 2 sons one of them was just younger than me, and then the other was quite a bit younger. But I went out there, I don't know what for, she just wanted me to come out, and so I spent the whole summer. And he was a big cattle feeder. He had a big cement tank that the cattle drank out of. So in these hot days, while we would go swimming in that big cement, it's just like a nice big swimming pool. I learned how to back float there. Didn't learn how to swim, but I learned how to back float. It's only probably 4 foot deep, maybe not that much. Came back on the train by myself. This was down in next to Goodland, Kansas. It's called Angeles. I went down there one time on vacation, the only vacation that my folks and kids ever took. It was about 100 miles away, and we got up at 4 o'clock in the morning and started out, and I think it took us all day long to get there. Old Model T. The baby sat in front, Jean sat in front with Mom and Dad, and then there was Johnny and me, Bernard, me, Pat. There's 5 of us. 3 of us sat, and then we held 2 on our laps. The Depression, I was what I call a Depression kid. I was a Depression kid. And it started in about 1934, I would say. And then, of course, it lasted about 4 years. And, of course, my father was a wheat farmer, and they would plant their wheat in the fall of the year. It would come up in the fall of the year, be green, and then when the snow covered it, it would die down. Well, in the spring of the year, early, it would come up, nice and green. And by July, there was a drought. It took every bit of that wheat and it was just like a brown earth. So for 4 years, my dad didn't raise anything. They had to get rid of all of the cattle, the chickens. It was hot. It was a year of 1936, I think it was, that it was extremely hot down in Kansas. I can remember one time it was like 118 degrees. We didn't have any fans. It was just stifling. You just got up real early and did what you had to do and sat underneath a tree. The Dust Bowl was horrible, absolutely horrible. It was clouds of dust that was just like night. You could see it coming, just like a great big black cloud that reached from the sky to clear down to the ground. It would just roll in, just took all the sunlight out of the atmosphere. Our roosters crow. It was so dark that they thought it was night and the roosters were crowing. It was just a kind of an eerie situation. We had to put blankets, wet blankets, up at the doors and the windows to keep the dust out. And it still would sift through. In the morning, you'd have a big ring of dust around your mouth and in your nostril. It would last probably a good 3 or 4 hours before it went on. It seemed to me like sometimes it lasted all day. And the dust would pile up along the fence rows where it would even cover up the fence rows. And it was real, real fine. It's fun to play in, waller around in it because it was just like real fine sand. But it surprised us when it came in. We didn't even have a radio. We did have a telephone. And if anything happened, why, everybody was on the line and they could hear what you were talking and your conversation. And at the last, we didn't even have a telephone because we couldn't pay the bill. By the end of 1939, even, it was still bad. It was the Depression and the Dust Bowl that did all the farmers in. There wasn't all the farmers because my uncle, he had money that his wife was given, and he survived it well, but my father lost his farm because he couldn't make the final payment on it. I can't even explain it to you where you can think of what it was like. That's something that's still painful to even talk about. I don't even like to talk about it. How my parents ever lived through it, I'll never know. And my mother insisted that we go to school, high school, which a lot of the kids were dropping out because. And so we went to school during the Depression, and we boarded in one room. Well, actually, we had 2 rooms. I had a room and my brothers had a room. And we paid $5 a month for that room. And we worked at the school, at the high school. It was called NYA. That's National Youth Association that Franklin Roosevelt put into effect to help kids through school. I mean, so they could earn a little money. That was in Lebanon, Kansas. We would work at the school of different things that we could, janitor work mostly. And my brothers did too, so we could put ourselves through high school. And of course, our mother would, on the weekends when we came home, why she would, send back bread and it was probably about 10 miles. Dad would come down and pick us up, and Sunday night he'd take us back. I think that we were the only ones that I know of that did that. Then when I was 14, my mother was really, really sick, and she had a bad gallbladder. So my aunt came and got her and took her to Topeka, Kansas that summer. She was operated on and she was in the hospital for a long time, and then she stayed with my aunt to recuperate most of the summer. And that was the year that Dad lost the farm. And my 2 older brothers one was in the CCC camp, Civilian Conservation Corps, and that was created also by Franklin Roosevelt to give young kids a place to eat and stay and earn money. And my other brother, he went down into Kansas to my aunt's to work on their farm. So that left me at home with all my siblings, which was Pat, Jean, Rose, and Bob. And of course my dad, but he was not much help, as most dads were then. So I got everything ready to move to Red Cloud, Nebraska. Lebanon, Kansas, at that time did not have a Catholic church. Mom wanted to move where there was a church. We decided to move to Red Cloud, so I had to go to Red Cloud, find a place to live, move all the stuff from the old house to a little house that I rented. So the whole family moved. We went up, I started school in Red Cloud that fall. I graduated from Red Cloud High School, and the minute I got out of high school, graduated, I headed for Denver. And I went to Denver with my brother and his friend in an old Model T Roadster. And it had a rumble seat. So my brother and his friend sat in the front, and I sat in the rumble seat all the way to Denver. The reason we went to Denver in the first place is to find jobs. And we felt like we didn't have any job, we didn't have anything in mind, but we would have taken anything to work. So we just went out there to try to find jobs. My first job was working in a real fancy restaurant. I had never worked at a restaurant before in my life, but I had put my application in at Remington Arms. It was an ammunition depot, hoping I would get a job there. But I did get one at Montgomery Ward, and I was working in the office as a typist for $18 a week. In October, I received a call from Remington Arms to come out for an interview, and I got the job as an inspector. Oh, I was making big bucks. They made 30 caliber machine gun bullets. To be an inspector, you had to inspect the bullet itself. You had a board that you took these bullets. There was a bin of all these little bullets, and you took the board and got them on there some way because we had to shake it, I can remember that, so they would fall into the holes, and they all fell in with their points up. And then you would look this way, and you'd turn this board that way and this way. You'd pick out the ones that had dents in them, because the machinery that made it sometimes would chew them up, and you had to get all those out. Then you'd take it and you'd dump it over into the one that's in the rejects you'd put over here. And if you had so many defects in the bullet itself, you had to do the whole thing over. So you was very, very careful. Of course, we knew that we had to be careful because it was our boys that it was going to. After I was there a while, I was made a timekeeper, and I also kind of worked under it was under the FBI, but I wasn't a government employee of the FBI to report any sabotage. So I had to check their badges every day with their face to make sure that they had the right badge and right name, and I would be right out into the area, and I'd keep my eyes peeled for anything that I thought wasn't supposed to be there, and then I would report it to I had two that I reported. One of them had a wad of gum that he had stuck on the machine gun belt, which if they'd have put that in, it would have jammed the machine gun. And the other one, it wasn't really anything that he did, but he was just so darn lazy that he wasn't getting out his quota, and you had to do so much a day to keep up with the Army regulations. I didn't meet this fellow at the plant where I worked, but he did work there. But there was a dance that night, and I went with another kid. Got to the dance, and this good-looking guy came over and wanted to know if I would want to dance with him. And the guy that I went to the dance with had gone to the bathroom. So I thought, why not? So I got up and I danced with him, and he was pretty well out of it. I thought, because at that time I never even took a drink. So anybody that had a few drinks, to me they were drunk. He had this little flask of whiskey that he carried around in his back pocket. So he asked me for a date for the next night. I thought, that guy will never remember that he even asked me. But he had asked for my address and everything, so I gave it to him. He's a nice acting guy. I thought he'll never show up. And man, at 7 o'clock, there he was at my door. So we went to a movie, and you know what? He made the remark to one of his friends later that she didn't even let me kiss her goodnight. And I think that's probably what he liked. Why would he even say anything like that if he didn't respect me at least? And I felt like he respected me, and he did. And this was on February the 2nd, I think, that we met, and on June 4th, he proposed. I know he was in the car out in front of my apartment, but I don't know whether we had just gone for a ride or what, and he just brought this little box out and said, I have something to give you, and I hope you accept it. And I looked at it, and in the moonlight it looked awful big, but so I took it. I thought, okay. And we just about broke up once, because he was pressing me to get married, and I thought, this is too soon. And gosh, I was only 18 and I was having fun. But it was only a week and we was back together again. And we were married at St. Michael's Church out in Aurora, Colorado. My mother and my aunt and my girlfriend that I roomed with, another guy that was a friend of Dean's that he worked with, and he was Catholic. And he was going to stand up with him, but he never showed. So this priest his name was John something, that he came and stood up with him. And that's the end of the romance. The honeymoon, we didn't have a honeymoon. One night in a hotel, we spent the night at downtown. I think it was called the Brown Hotel. And my girlfriend that I roomed with before I was married and her boyfriend made out on the bed all night, and Dad and I spent our time spitting out the window until about 3 o'clock in the morning. Now we're seeing how far we can spit out. I don't know whether it hit anybody or not. Yeah, we had an apartment right across from my aunt. Well, actually, it's 2 rooms. There's a living room and a kitchen. And the bed there's a Murphy bed that pulled down out of the wall. And we lived there until he went to the service. I kept on working at the plant until he came back from overseas then. I went down to Oklahoma. I think I went down in maybe June and got a job in a private home as a cooking for the people. They had a big hardware store. We had an apartment behind their house. It was a garage that they made into an apartment. And I stayed there until I got pregnant, and then I went home to my folks, and he was sent to Virginia, and he was sent out there in charge of recreation. So all he did was basketball and baseball, and so that was in 1944. Jan was born then in 1945, and he didn't see her until she was 6 months old, and then he was discharged in December of 1945. just before Christmas. Best Christmas we ever had. And then we went from there to Jolly. Spent 9 months with these folks, living with these folks. And then we built this little old house. That house was built in Jolly and moved down to a lot in Rockville City. That little house is still in Rockville City and people are living in it. He worked for Clark Oil and Supply, which his uncle run. We moved to Lake City in 1947. The fellow that owned the little one was retiring, and he had a truck that we bought, and I had saved war bonds when I was working, and I had $3,000 saved of war bonds, and that bought the little house, and we sold the little house for $4,500, and that bought his truck in Lake City. The other house, the other station was down on the east end, and that was run by an old fellow by the name of McDonald, and he retired, so Dad bought that station and tore it down and built a new one in about 1956 maybe. What accomplishments were you most proud of? I had 4 of them. The most accomplishments that I'm most proud of, and still am to this day, is my children. Because you give them life, and then you see all the things that they've done with their life, which makes you proud of them. I think probably the greatest achievements and accomplishments are 2 different things. I think accomplishment is something that is close to your heart, and achievement is something a goal that you set for yourself in your life. The achievement probably that I'm most proud of is my work ethic, how I kind of rolled with the punches, so to speak. I started out when I was 17 years old. In order to get a job at 17, a government job, I actually did a fraudulent thing. I altered my birth certificate, not my birth certificate, my baptismal certificate. And I did it very well. I could have been very well in that career if I wanted to be. No matter what kind of a job I had, I always worked as if I owned the place. I think probably that is my greatest achievement, is that I gave my best when I worked.